So the second thing that we need to straighten out to have a better understanding of sanctification is we need to correct our really awful accounting that we have as it relates to justice and debt, indebtedness to God, the penalty of sin, all those things. So we'll say that this is 0, okay? And we are told, rightly so, that we have a debt of sin to God, and that this sin is, or this debt is infinite. It goes on infinitely. We are indebted to God because not only of imputed sin through Adam, but also willful and sins of omission that we commit in here now. And this sin is truly, the debt that we owe is truly infinite. So that is correct. We're told that, and that's correct. We are told then that by trusting in Christ, this infinite debt is brought back to 0. So when we place our trust in Christ, Christ paid the penalty for our sin, so then, whoop, it shrinks back up and we're back to 0. That our debt is wiped out, it is no longer there. That too is correct. Where we make a mistake, however, I'm going to title this Atonement and Law Keeping. So this is correct up to this point. We do have an infinite debt, both from imputed sin and also the sin that we commit in a daily basis. Christ's sacrifice does bring us back to 0. This is true so far. But this is where we err. This is where we begin to make a mistake. In plotting these things here, okay, in plotting these things, we infer, sometimes some of us more subtly than others, that then we need to then start to build. So debt is down here, righteousness is this way, and then we need to begin to build on this. So we've been forgiven so much, so now we must set about trying to build our works of righteousness. And so we stack our pennies and our quarters and our dimes, and we begin to build. We begin to build and kind of keep track of these things. And then what happens? Well, we sin and, comes crashing back down, and we go back into the negative. And so then what do? Well, we rededicate. Okay, we rededicate to get us back to 0. And how many times have you heard that? Wow, I made a decision once for Christ, and I was doing great, and I was, starting to change my life and do these things, and then I fell into this sin, and I rebelled, and I backslid. And so, how many altar calls do you hear where it's a call to rededicate? Perhaps one time you made a decision for Christ, but now you've fallen away, and it's time to get back to 0. So then we get in this cycle, okay? We get in this cycle of trying to stack our pennies and our dimes, and then falling and getting into debt again, and then rededicating back to 0, and it just becomes this really demoralizing cycle. Okay? In order to correct this, we need to have better accounting. We need a better understanding of what's going on here. So, yes, it is true. Infinite debt. Okay? Infinite debt. That is true. Christ's atonement brings us back to 0, wipes out that debt. But what we have to understand, and I guess I'll put a plus here, we have to understand the second part of this, okay? It's the atonement. The atonement gets us to 0. It's not our law keeping which is stacked onto here. And that's where we make a mistake, and that's where we have to correct. It is Christ's infinite law-keeping. I'm running out of ink on this thing. It's Christ's infinite law-keeping which is attributed to our account at the moment of atonement. So I titled that last one, Atonement and Law-Keeping. In modern evangelical America, we trust Christ for the atonement, and then we lean hard on ourselves for the law-keeping. And that's a deadly combination. I think that's a Matthew 7 type combination, where we could potentially hear, well, not many say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all of these things for you? And he'll say, depart from me, for I never knew you. Christ's atonement plus our law-keeping is a deadly, potentially deadly combination. We must have Christ's atonement and Christ's law-keeping. And you say, well, that's just semantics, or you're just, mincing words. No, this is vitally important to properly understanding sanctification, getting our view of sanctification back in. Because here, when our law-keeping is deemed infinite, our pennies don't matter. The pennies that we try to stack up don't matter. They're insignificant. Christ is... They don't matter in the grand scheme of things, because on God's books, the atonement has brought our debt to zero, and Christ's law-keeping has put infinite good, infinite law-keeping into our account. So we must clarify and must properly delineate the atonement, which is Christ's, the law-keeping, which is Christ's. And from there, we can then go back to this idea of sanctification and begin to correct it. And we'll do that in the next video.